Hey guys, got more random battles. Let's get right into it. He starts off with Bombardier, I start off with Sylveon. He goes right for that U-turn, pivots into his Berserker. I go for the Hyper Voice, it's now resisted. I get a little bit of my lefties back, go for the Protect to scout out what he's going to do. He goes right for the Iron Head trying to get that damage. I get a little bit more lefties. I then decide to switch into my Quagsire. He goes for another Iron Head, Quagsire eats that up. Takes some Life Orb damage, I get some lefties back. He goes for the Stealth Rocks, I go for the Earthquake, take out the Berserker. I get some more lefties back. He then decides to switch into his Zarude. I decide to switch into my Frostmith. He goes for that Swords Dance right away. He goes for the Close Combat, takes out my Moth, lowers his defenses a little bit. He takes some more Life Orb damage. I then decide to go into my Lock Kicks. Go right for that First Impression, take him out. He then decides to go into his Salazzle. I decide to switch back into my Quagsire, takes some rocks. He goes for the Flamethrower, I eat that right up, but he gets a burn. Gets some lefties, takes some damage. He then goes for the Terra Flying, goes for another Flamethrower. I go for the Liquidation, do barely anything. He gets some lefties, I get some, takes some burn. He goes for another Flamethrower, Quagsire just hangs on. I go for the Recover, get a nice chunk back. We both get our lefties back. He then decides to switch into his Squawk Billy. I go for another Recover, get the full health. Takes some more damage, he gets his Burn Orb going. He goes for the Facade, does a huge chunk to me. I go for the Liquidation, do barely anything to him. We both take some burn damage. He goes for another Facade, takes out my Quagsire. He takes some more burn damage. I then go into my Sylveon, take some rocks, go for the Terra Steel. He goes for the Facade, still does a huge chunk even with the resisted hit, but I'm able to take him out with the Hyper Voice. I get some lefties back. He goes into his Salazzle. I go for the Protect to try to scout what he's going to do. He goes for that Toxic, but I'm protected. We both get some lefties. He then goes for the Toxic. This one connects. I go for the Hyper Voice, do a good chunk, but he hangs on. I decide to go for another Protect just to see. He goes for a Flamethrower. I protect it. We both get some more lefties back. I take some poison. He goes for another Flamethrower. Takes out my Sylveon. I then decide to go back into my Lock Kicks, take some rocks damage, go for the Sucker Punch, but he's able to hang on. He goes for the Flamethrower, takes out my Bug. He gets some more lefties back. I then go into my Klefki. He goes for another Flamethrower, does a huge chunk, but I'm able to hang on. I go for the Play Rough, take out the Lizard. He then decides to go into his Lucario. I go for that T-Weave, get the power on him. He goes for the Meteor Mash, takes out my Keys. He takes some Life Orb damage. I then decide to go into my Phalanx, my last Pokemon. I go for the No Retreat, trap the Lucario, get my boost. He gets that full power. I then go for the Close Combat, take him out. I lose some defense, lose some health to the Life Orb. He then goes into his last mon, the Bombardier. I go for the Close Combat, take him out. Good game. At this point, I ask you guys to please like, comment, share, and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. And without further ado, let's get into game 2. I start with my Magnezone, he starts off with Dondoza. He immediately switches into the Gumshoe, tanks the T-Bolt. I then go for the Volt Switch and pivot into my Leafeon, expecting the ground move, and then tank the Earthquake. He then goes into his Vespiquen, eats up my Leaf Blade, I do no damage. Takes some Life Orb. I then decide to switch back into my Magnezone. He decides to set up some spikes. Goes for the Terra Steel. My T-Bolt does nothing. Sets up another layer of spikes. I go for another T-Bolt, do a nice chunk, but he's able to hang on. He goes for the Roost, gets a big chunk back. I then go into my Scissor, take some hazard damage. He goes for the Roost, he's back to full. I then decide to go for the Defog, get rid of all those hazards. He retaliates with the Air Slash, does a nice chunk to my Scissor. I decide to go for the Close Combat, do about half, but Vespiquen's tanky over there. He goes for another Air Slash, takes out my Scissor. I then go into my Passimian, he decides to switch into his Rotom, go for the Close Combat, but I'm immune. I then decide to switch into my Alolan Persian. He goes for the Will-O-Wisp, burns my cat. I get a little bit of burn damage. He then decides to switch into his Vespiquen. I go right for the Dark Pulse, do a nice chunk, but he's able to hang on. I take some more burn damage. I then decide to go for the nasty part setting up. He goes for the Roost, gets some health back. I decide to get a little greedy, go for another nasty plot. He goes for the Air Slash, my cat hangs on. Take some more burn, go for the Dark Pulse, take out the Buzz. He then decides to go back into the Gumshoe. I go for the Dark Pulse, take him out. But my Persian goes down to the Life Orb. I then go back into my Passimian. He goes into his Rotom, goes for the Will-O-Wisp, burns my Monkey. I go for the knockoff, do a huge chunk, get rid of his Life Orb, but he's able to hang on. takes some damage. He goes for the nasty plot, I go for another knockoff, but he's still hanging on over there. Takes some more burn, he goes for the Shadow Ball, and lowers my defense. But activates my Defiant, give me the attack boost, and then I take him out. I take a little bit more damage, he goes into his Dondoza, I go for the knockoff his leftovers. He goes for the curse, starts setting up right in front of my face. Take a little bit more burn damage, I then go for another knockoff, he goes for a curse, and I end up going down to the burn. I then go back into my Magnezone, go for the Terra Flying T-Bolt, take out the Dondoza. He then decides to go into his Hatterene, I go for the Flash Cannon, do a huge chunk, he retaliates with the Mystic Fire, lowers my special attack. I go for another Flash Cannon, take him out. He then decides to go into his Palkia, he goes for the Fire Blast, does barely anything to me. I go for the Volt Switch and decide to pivot out, but he forfeits. Alrighty, let's get into game 3. They start off with their Pyroar, I start off with my Kricketune. He goes right for the Will-O-Wisp, burns my Bug. I decide to set up some webs. I take some burn damage, I then switch into my Golduck, get that Cloud9 rolling. He goes for the Fire Blast, I eat that right up. He then decides to switch into the Forretress, gets caught in those webs. I whiff the Hydro Pump. I decide to go for another one, do a huge chunk this turn. He goes for the Rapid Spin, gets rid of my webs. Gets a little bit of lefties back. He then decides to switch into his Girafarig. I go for the Psy Shock, does barely anything. I then go for a Hydro Pump, do a nice chunk to the Giraffe, but take some more Life Orb. He goes right for the Nasty Plot. I go for another Hydro Pump, take him out. He then decides to go into his Cresselia. I decide to switch into my Honchkrow. He starts setting up with those Combines right in my face. Goes for the Terra Fairy. I go for the Sucker Punch, but now it's resisted. He goes for the Moonblast, takes out my Bird. He gets a little bit of his lefties back. I then decide to go into my Sunflora. He goes for the Psychic, but Sunflora eats that up. I go for the Sludge Bomb, do a nice chunk, but Cresselia is a tank over there. He goes for a Moonblast, does another chunk. I go for the Sludge Bomb, but he's still hanging on. He goes for the Moonblast, but Sunflora is a beast, takes him out with the Sludge Bomb. He then decides to go into the SQ, goes for the Belly Drum, sets up right in front of my face, maxes the attack, eats the Citrus Berry. I then go for the Sludge Bomb, do a nice chunk, get the Lucky Poison, but he's still hanging on over there. Goes for the Ice Spinner, takes out my Sunflower. Takes a little bit more poison damage. I then go into my Regieleki and take him out with a T-Bolt. He then goes back into his Pyroar. I go for the Terra Electric, go right for the Volt Switch, do a huge chunk, and decide to pivot back into my Kricketune. He goes for the Hyper Voice, does a big chunk. I take some more burn damage. He goes for the Fire Blast, completely whiffs. I decide to set up my webs again, take some more burn damage. He goes for the Fire Blast, takes out my Cricket. I then go back into my Regieleki, go for the T-Bolt, take him out. He then decides to go into his Flareon. He decides to go right for the Quick Attack, does a nice chunk. I go for the T-Bolt and do about half. He gets that Toxic Boost going. I go for the T-Bolt, take him out. He then goes into his last Mon, the Forretress. I go for the T-Bolt, take him out. Good game. Alrighty, and that's the video. Please know what you guys think down below and stay tuned for more future content. Peace!